Some of the best video games are about some of the worst things that could happen. Plagues. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 more of the worst plagues in video game history. A real quick spoiler alert. If you hear the name of a game and you don't want it spoiled for you, stop watching there. Starting off at number 10, it is the Flood. If you ever remember Halo, the Flood is perhaps one of the more interesting video game baddies because it came before every single bad guy being a disease or parasite that wipes out entire civilizations and leaves them as sort of zombies. The Flood is actually an ancient race that was corrupted due to its defeat in a war with a life form it created itself. The Flood is what's left of a race called the Precursors, and it was the Forerunners that defeated them. The Forerunners also dubbed themselves the quote-unquote Guardians of the Galaxy, although not the kind of merry band that the Marvel movies put forward. There's two stages of a Flood outbreak, the feral stage and the coordinated stage. The feral stage basically being individuals get infected with the Flood. Coordinated stage, a grave mine forms and sends out complex instructions to all of the individuals infected, and that makes it a pretty formidable foe as the grave mine isn't dumb. After there's too much Flood for it to control, it takes on another stage, the intergalactic stage, in which it spreads out from there, obviously. The Flood was eventually defeated by genetically engineering a sort of counter Flood that a third of the human population was infected with, and when the Flood came into contact with these people, it would basically just reverse course and start killing itself. However, until that was figured out, there really wasn't any way to stop it, and that was pretty scary. Coming in at number 9, the Necromorphs. If you've ever played Dead Space, it's a hell of an atmospheric experience, and part of the reason it's so scary is obviously the bad guys. Necromorphs are reanimated corpses, which doesn't make them very different from a lot of other different bad guys. But in Dead Space, necromorphs are actually the result of a signal emitted by a marker, believed to be created by some alien race at some point, that both compel humans to make copy markers so more signals are emitted, as well as reanimates dead flesh. The ultimate goal is to kill and reanimate enough of the life on a planet that all of the biomass can be accumulated around the marker, creating a moon-sized necromorph that emits the signal, sends out markers, and ultimately just keeps consuming more and more life. Now, what put all of this in motion was never actually completely explained in the game. We don't know where markers came from, and therefore are the Brethren Moons, as they were called, some kind of bioweapon? Was it a terror attack? Or was it a fallen species like the Flood? Unless they ever make another Dead Space, and that's kinda doubtful, we'll probably never know. Moving on to number 8, A Plague Tale: Innocence is really a damn good narrative game that gives us a perfect example why single-player, immersive stories are so important. But part of why this game is so good and so intriguing is that it gives us a sort of slightly exaggerated portrayal of the Plague of Black Death. The way that it manages to do this is by making the rats that carry and infect people with the plague also kind of a physical manifestation of the plague. Where the rats go and what the rats kill is kind of the plague doing its thing in this game. But it's more than that. There is a supernatural element to A Plague Tale: Innocence, and that is the ancient evil that is dormant in the bloodline of the main characters. You play as Amica, and her smaller brother Hugo is the one actually affected by this. As it turns out, he actually eventually has the power to control the rats and therefore the plague. And he's not the only person over the course of the story that has this ability, of course. That's the entire conflict, as a matter of fact. That there's not only a disease that can wipe everyone out, but that it's under the direct control of somebody who might, in theory, want to do that. Coming in at number 7 is the Haran virus from Dying Light. Now, as far as zombie viruses go, it's not particularly unique in effects. You get bit, you get a virus, you become a zombie. It might happen in a couple hours, might happen in a couple of days. If you take antizin, a drug in the game, it will stop the virus's progression, and you don't turn into a zombie, which is nice. because that makes one of the more interesting aspects of the Dying Light story. The fact that in a lot of ways you're basically just trying to survive while they're trying to make a cure to this thing because you've been bit. Another aspect that makes this particular virus so good is it actually provides scientific reasons for why the zombies don't come out till night, at least for the most part. The virus itself is a rabies derivative that has an intolerance to UV rays, meaning light from the sun kills the virus itself, and also hurts a lot of hosts. What's neat about that is basically the mechanics of the game are explained through a very short briefing on the virus itself. In movie critic circles, it's often discussed that the entire first third of a film could be cut, and people would figure out what's going on anyway. This is because exposition is often done very bluntly and haphazardly. This is not an example of that, in that it literally tells us what to expect from the day-night cycle without saying anything about the fact the game has a day-night cycle. In my opinion, that's actually the appeal of the Haran virus, and indeed Dying Light itself. It finds very clever ways of telling you how to play the game that are fully integrated in the story. Coming in at number 6 is the Freaker virus from Days Gone. Now, given we've already talked about a couple of zombie infections that frankly aren't terribly dissimilar from this, I'm going to go ahead and say that for the most part it's a pretty standard lab was developing a virus got out, everybody turned into a zombie, and America ended story. However, I want to say what makes the Freaker virus so interesting and unique actually doesn't even occur unless you get the secret ending, in which you find out that the Freaker virus is actually evolving, and that rather than just being a zombie, a mindless rabid fool out for blood, some infected are actually gaining human intelligence. Now, it's one of those viruses that gives the infected enhanced speed, agility, and strength, so if those smart people are also bloodthirsty, that's actually a pretty good setup for a sequel. Coming in at number 5, the Scourge of the Beast in Bloodborne. So the Scourge of the Beast is a plague in which citizens of Yharnam become monsters, which is tremendously inconvenient because Yharnam has a supposedly wonderful healing process called blood ministration performed by the Healing Church. Supposedly, it can cure you of pretty much just about anything. The church also controls all knowledge involved in this process, which is not suspicious at all. Okay, it actually kinda is pretty suspicious. In fact, it's mostly the plot of the game, which is that the Scourge of the Beast is more or less caused by the blood ministration. Now, not everybody turns into a beast, obviously. Presumably the reason people are still even hanging around at all is that the blood ministration actually does help them, and in small amounts it seems like it probably doesn't kill them or turn them into a beast. However, not everybody's taking it in small amounts because there's plenty of beasts around, and ultimately it turns out to be a big plot for the Great Ones to find some way to reproduce, because they can't. The Great Ones being eldritch horrors of cosmic proportions. God, Bloodborne is great. It's so complex and it's impossible to explain in such a short period of time, but if you haven't played Bloodborne, it's just a treasure. Coming in at number 4 is the Chimeran virus. This comes from the Resistance series, and is a virus that was created by the Chimera, a species of being that in-game occupied the Earth about 60 million years before humanity did, and during the course of a war with some other species left the planet and, in present day, for whatever reason, decided to come back. The virus is genetically engineered to be implanted into a human and transform them into a chimera. I wouldn't want to be that. Look at that. Now, obviously, this is a hybrid. This is not a full chimera. There's also a pure chimera, but the virus really only concerns the hybrid chimeras, as they are created from humans. What sucks for those people is they're literally transformed into an alien being and then forced to wage war against people. I don't know if they retain any of the memories of when they were a person, but hey, cool. I got bit and then I decided to commit a genocide in the name of a 60 million year old alien menace. Fun day, right? Number 3 is the Blacklight virus, which is an interesting viral infection created, of course, in a lab as a bioweapon. That's actually a derivative of another virus, also created in a lab, called Red Light, that was known for transforming... Can you guess? people into monsters. It does this by quote-unquote activating the junk DNA we're carrying, and actually becomes sentient separate of its host. The main character is actually infected with it, a host that is able to control it in a different way, and he's actually far more entangled with its creation than he has any idea. He has amnesia, and is also the guy that synthesized it. Prototype is a weird game, but all of this sort of complex lore that sounds very science-y yields some really great gameplay mechanics. Moving on to number 2, the Taint from Dragon Age Inquisition. Now the Taint is a corruption. It's a remnant of the old gods, and becoming corrupted by the Taint will cause you to hear their call. Now it doesn't turn anybody into a monster. However, it does create monsters, and these Darkspawn can actually infect humans, and what happens to humans is, well, exactly what you might expect from something called a plague. They essentially wither away and die. It can happen within hours or a much longer period of time, but with the Grey Wardens, it's actually intentionally contracted as to be able to hear the call of the old gods. I think it's actually a really good conflict and provides a more traditional backdrop of a plague as the sort of bad thing going on, as well as the more epic type of bad guy in the Archdemon. And finally, coming in at number 1 is Cordyceps, the fungal infection from The Last of Us. Now, for me, this is perhaps one of the more interesting of all of these plagues, because it has some basis in reality. In fact, the inspiration for it came from watching a bullet ant infected with OPHIOCORDYCEPS UNILATERALIS on BBC's Planet Earth. That fungus attacks carpenter ants to leave their natural habitat and go bite down on the underside of a leaf in an area where temperature and light is conducive to fungal growth. It just basically sits there while the fungus feeds on it, and then it releases spores. It's not entirely different from what happens in The Last of Us, except for it's a little bit more aggressive. People who contract the fungal infection lose their higher brain functioning, and this causes them to act feral. Gradually, more and more, the cordyceps grows and transforms them into a sort of more fungal, less human being, who works to not only infect other humans, but eventually find a place to release spores. Now don't worry about it, even though there is actually a cordyceps fungus and it does actually do this stuff to ants, it's basically impossible that it could ever do it to humans. This is justified in-game by it being a mutated strain of cordyceps, but in my opinion, part of the reason why the game manages to be so scary with its justification for its zombies is that it sounds just this side of possible, given there's a real thing in the world that does this. It's not though, so sleep tight. What did you think was a particularly scary plague in a video game? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.